In 1513, a man sat in a cold cell with rope burns on his wrists and nothing left to lose. They had taken everything from him: his position, his income, his reputation, his physical dignity. Niccolò Machiavelli had been arrested by the Medici, accused of conspiracy, tortured, and released into a poverty that must have felt like a second imprisonment. He went home to a small property outside Florence. He put on formal robes at night to write, because he believed the act of writing required a certain gravity, a certain respect for what he was doing. And he produced observations about human nature, so precise, so stripped of comfortable illusion, that the institutions of his era immediately recognized them as dangerous. The Catholic Church banned his work. Courts across Europe quietly circulated it. Kings who publicly denounced him privately kept copies. And buried inside those writings, beneath the political theory, beneath the military strategy, beneath the philosophy of power, is a consistent, recurring, almost structurally inevitable truth about what separates men who command the space they inhabit from men who are simply present in it. This is not a video about manipulation. It is a video about the specific internal qualities that produce external gravity. The difference matters because one of those things can be performed for a while before it collapses under its own hollowness, and the other is something you either build genuinely or you do not have at all. Machiavelli, who had no patience for performance that lacked substance, understood the difference clearly, and it begins with a trap that most men walk into so gradually they never see it closing around them. The trap is comfort. Not the comfort of a good meal or a warm room. The comfort of a life that makes no demands on you. The slow atrophy of the man who has rounded off every sharp edge, because sharp edges create friction, and friction makes people uncomfortable, and God forbid anyone feels uncomfortable. He stops taking positions on things that matter, because positions invite disagreement. He stops pursuing the things that scare him, because fear is unpleasant, and there is always something easier to do instead. He stops requiring anything from himself beyond the minimum necessary to keep the machinery of his life running without incident. Society does not punish this. It actively rewards it. He's so easy to be around. He never causes problems. He's always agreeable. These observations are delivered as compliments, but Machiavelli would recognize them instantly as something else. The description of a man who has already begun to disappear. In his discourses, Machiavelli writes about how states fall not from military defeat, but from the internal softness that makes military defeat inevitable. Citizens who have grown accustomed to peace stop preparing for conflict. They mistake the absence of immediate threat for permanent safety. When the crisis eventually arrives, and in Machiavelli's view, it always eventually arrives, they discover that the capacity they needed was one they quietly abandoned during the comfortable years. Your inner life follows the same trajectory. When you stop challenging yourself, when your days require nothing genuinely difficult from you, when you have optimized your existence for minimal friction and maximum predictability, something real and essential begins to diminish. Women who have been with a man through this process often describe it in ways that sound like they are talking about a different person, because in the ways that matter, they are. The man she was drawn to had something alive in him. The man standing before her now has the same face, but a different frequency. Less signal, more static. What she is detecting is not a change in his behavior. It is a change in his essence. And the first thing Machiavelli would tell you is this: comfort is not the destination. It is the symptom of someone who has stopped traveling. The second truth concerns a concept that sits at the center of everything Machiavelli wrote, and is almost universally misunderstood by people who have not read him carefully. He called it fortuna, the chaotic, unpredictable force that governs everything outside your control. Markets collapse, plans dissolve, people you trusted reveal themselves. Fortuna, in Machiavelli's framework, is not fortune in the sense of luck. It is the totality of the uncertain, everything that did not ask your permission before it changed. His observation about how to relate to fortuna is the one that his critics have always found most disturbing, because it refuses comfortable moderation. He argues that fortuna favors the audacious over the careful, not because audacity is wise in every context, but because the man who acts, even imperfectly, even with incomplete information, shapes reality. The man who waits for conditions to align perfectly with his plans does not get his plans executed under ideal conditions. He gets overtaken by the man who was already moving while he was still calculating. Apply this to the texture of how a man moves through his own life. Consider two men. One who has a thought, runs it through 17 layers of internal review, considers every possible reception, edits it for optimal safety, and then delivers a carefully sanitized version of what he actually thinks. And one who trusts his own instincts enough to speak his actual mind, make his actual move, pursue his actual interest, even knowing the result might be imperfect. Women are surrounded by the first kind of man, the strategic kind, the kind who has been told that careful, calculated behavior is sophisticated, attractive, mature. What they experience this as, though they rarely articulate it in these terms, is the absence of genuine spontaneity. The absence of a man who trusts himself enough to act without a safety net. And that absence, in Machiavelli's framework, is not a small thing. It is the difference between a man who is living and a man who is managing his life from a distance. The third truth is the one most men hear and misapply. Purpose is attractive, not because it is strategic, but because it is real. Here is the test. If you removed completely and permanently the desire for romantic attention, if it simply ceased to exist as a motivation, what would you do with your life? Most men, when they sit honestly with this question, find that the answer is less clear than they expected. They find vague directions rather than burning commitments. They find things they think they should want, rather than things that demand expression from the inside. They find that a significant portion of what they believe is purpose is actually performance, the curated appearance of direction, designed to project a certain kind of desirability. Machiavelli studied men throughout history who possessed what he called virtù, a word his translators render as virtue, but which he meant more specifically as strength of character, the particular quality of inner force that expresses itself through action rather than through intention. And his observation about the most consequential men in history was consistent. None of them were driven primarily by their desire for women. Women were drawn into their orbits. The orbits were already massive. Caesar was not motivated by Cleopatra. She entered a gravitational field that existed before she arrived. Alexander's campaigns were the expression of something internal, a demand from his own nature that could not be satisfied by any external validation. Napoleon built what he built because he could not have not built it. These men had complicated, passionate, often destructive relationships with women. But the women were responding to the purpose. The purpose was never constructed for the women. This is a physical phenomenon dressed in psychological language. When a man has something that genuinely burns in him, something he would pursue regardless of audience, something that costs him sleep and demands his best thinking, and pulls him forward, even when the forward motion is uncomfortable. He carries a frequency that other people can detect before they can explain it. His posture changes. The quality of his eye contact changes. His tolerance for nonsense contracts sharply, because nonsense costs him something real. Time he could have spent on the thing that matters. And the specific absence of need that this produces, The not-chasing quality that emerges from a man who is already complete in his direction, is the single most compelling thing a man can project. Because you cannot fake the absence of need. You can only arrive at it by genuinely not needing. The fourth truth is uncomfortable specifically for men who believe that accommodation is the same as generosity. Boundaries that you will not enforce do not exist. Machiavelli tells the story of Cesare Borgia's management of the Romagna region in detail that most readers find unsettling. He documents it not to celebrate cruelty, but to examine the relationship between order and respect. Borgia took over a territory that was functionally lawless. Previous rulers had tried to govern through leniency and had produced chaos. Borgia appointed an enforcer, restored order by making the cost of disorder real, and then, in a move that Machiavelli clearly found masterful in its psychological precision, had the enforcer publicly removed once the order was established, positioning himself as the relief from the harshness rather than its source. Forget the political mechanics. Look at the underlying principle. Order, real order, not the polite fiction of stated expectations that everyone ignores, requires that the cost of violating it is genuine. You can state a standard. You can announce a boundary. You can describe what you will and will not accept. But if you do not enforce it when it is crossed, you have not established a standard. You have established a test. And every time someone crosses the line you drew and experiences no consequence, you have confirmed for them that the line was decorative. This is the specific dynamic that Machiavelli would recognize operating in relationships where one person has gradually lost the other's genuine respect. Not the respect of fond feeling that can persist long after the deeper form has eroded. The respect that is closer to taking seriously, to factoring into calculations, to treating as real. Women will, in the early stages of any relationship, test the edges of what a man has presented as his limits, not through deliberate strategy, through the basic human behavior of calibrating how much weight something actually carries. A plan cancelled without consequence calibrates easily. A comment that crosses a line and produces a patient, thorough explanation of why it crossed a line calibrates differently than the same comment that produces a calm, non-dramatic, non-negotiable response that simply holds. Every interaction of this type is writing a document about what kind of man you are. The only question is what that document says. Machiavelli's position was direct. A single firm response is worth more than 10 lenient ones. Not because harshness is the goal, but because clarity is. And clarity, the specific quality of a man whose stated position and his actual behavior are the same thing, is the foundation that every other attractive quality is built on. The fifth truth is the one that costs the most and is the most counterintuitive for genuinely good men. The removal of all challenge does not create paradise. It creates a museum. Machiavelli observed that men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their inheritance. This is dark humor, but the observation underneath it is precise. Human beings are neurologically wired to want what they might lose, not what they already possess. What is already possessed becomes invisible, not unvalued, but background. Part of the furniture of life rather than an active presence in it. This is not a moral failing. It is design. Desire is born in the space between wanting something and not being certain of having it. When that uncertainty is eliminated, when everything is given, everything is secure, every discomfort is absorbed, every need is anticipated and met before it is expressed, the space collapses, and with the space, the desire. The man who organizes his entire relationship around making her life frictionless believes he is being generous. What he is actually doing is removing the resistance that keeps desire functional. Because desire, like a muscle, requires resistance to remain strong. Without it, the atrophy is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It is simply a slow, barely perceptible diminishment of urgency, a gradual shift from wanting to having, from choosing to possessing, from a relationship that is alive to one that is maintained. Machiavelli watched this same dynamic operate in governance. Rulers who removed all demands from their subjects, low taxes, unlimited freedom, no expectations, did not produce grateful, loyal populations. They produced entitled ones who increasingly resented the ruler for whatever remained imperfect in their lives, because he had established the expectation that imperfection was his responsibility to prevent. Meanwhile, rulers who demanded something real from their people, sacrifice, contribution, discipline, produced populations who felt they were part of something that mattered. Because when something is asked of you, you are being implicitly told that you have something worth giving. The application is not to manufacture problems or to withhold generously for strategic effect. It is to stop organizing your entire existence around the project of her comfort. Challenge her. Hold her to something. Expect growth, investment, effort from her, as well as from yourself. Because a relationship where one person gives everything and the other receives is not a partnership. Partnerships require something from both parties. And what Machiavelli understood about human nature is that what we contribute to, we value. What is simply given to us, we eventually take for granted. The sixth truth is the one that separates the reading of Machiavelli that produces manipulation from the reading that produces genuine development. The mask only holds if there is a real face behind it. Machiavelli has a reputation as a teacher of performance, of the calculated management of appearance in service of outcomes you would not achieve if you revealed your actual character. This reading is not entirely wrong about his descriptive observations. He did document how power is managed through the management of perception, but it is incomplete about what he valued, because Machiavelli's most reliable admiration, across everything he wrote, was reserved for men who were genuinely formidable, not merely men who appeared that way, men whose substance matched or exceeded their presentation, men who could play the necessary game of appearances without losing themselves in it. The presentation you develop, the way you carry yourself, the quality of your eye contact, the deliberateness of your speech, the manner in which you occupy space, works when it reflects something real. When the man inside the presentation has depth, genuine interest in ideas, emotional intelligence that has been earned through difficulty rather than performed for effect, a perspective on the world that has been cultivated rather than borrowed. When these things are genuine, the presentation is not a mask. It is an exterior that accurately communicates an interior. When they are not genuine, when the presentation is constructed over emptiness, women, who are considerably more skilled at detecting this mismatch than most men believe, will eventually reach the interior. And the gap between what the exterior promised and what the interior delivers is not merely disappointing. It is experienced as a betrayal. She did not fall for a lie, exactly, but she fell for something she believed was a full person, and discovered was a sophisticated surface with very little behind it. This is why the real work is not the work of technique. It is the work of becoming, reading seriously and developing genuine opinions, engaging with your own failures honestly, rather than managing the narrative around them, developing skills that are difficult and take time, building something, anything, that requires sustained commitment, thinking carefully about the world and your place in it, not in order to have good answers when someone asks, but because the thinking itself develops the interior architecture that no presentation can substitute for. Machiavelli called this the union of virtu and prudenza, force and wisdom, action and reflection, the capacity to move decisively, and the depth to understand what you are moving toward. This combination is not common, and its rarity is precisely its value. The seventh truth is the one that contains all the others, the one thing that cannot be reduced, faked, or replaced. A man who cannot be reduced. This is what Machiavelli spent his intellectual life studying, and it is the quality he found most reliably fascinating in the figures he examined. Not the most powerful men, not the most successful men, the men who could not be contained in a simple summary, who adapted without losing their essential character, who held contradictions without being destroyed by the tension, who were capable of genuine warmth and genuine coldness, of strategic thinking and spontaneous action, of sustained purpose and genuine play. The man who cannot be reduced carries a specific kind of presence. He is not performing complexity, he simply contains it. He has genuine interests that exist independent of their social utility. He has considered his own failures seriously enough to be actually changed by what he found. He can fix something with his hands and discuss philosophy with equal comfort. He can sit in silence for an hour and not need it to mean something. He can make a decision under pressure without requiring validation and then laugh, genuinely, at his own mistakes. This range is what Machiavelli recognized as the signature of a man who is fully alive. And most men, by the time they reach adulthood, have substantially narrowed their range. Not through intention, but through the accumulated pressure of social conformity, of fitting into roles, of becoming the version of themselves that is easiest for other people to work with. They have reduced themselves before anyone else could do it for them. The recovery from this narrowing is not a technique. It is a commitment to pursue things that are genuinely difficult, regardless of whether they are socially optimal. To hold positions that are actually yours, rather than positions borrowed from whoever you spent the most time with last. To encounter ideas that challenge your existing framework, and stay with the discomfort long enough to find out what is actually on the other side of it. To become, in the most basic and literal sense of the word, more. Machiavelli wrote from exile, with nothing. No position, no patronage, no certainty about whether anything he was writing would ever be read. He wrote anyway, because the writing was the expression of something that the torture and the poverty and the humiliation had not managed to reach. The part of him that was specifically his, that had been developed through difficulty and thinking and honest observation, and that could not be taken from him because it was not external to him. It was him. That quality, that specific, uncopyable, irreducibly personal depth, is what he was describing in every page of every chapter he ever wrote. And it is what, across every century and every culture and every configuration of human relationship, produces the only form of gravity that is self-sustaining. You cannot acquire it from the outside. You can only build it from the inside. And the building takes time and discomfort and the willingness to be genuinely changed by what you encounter, rather than managing every encounter from a safe distance. Become complete on your own terms, not as a strategy, as a project, as the project. Because when you are genuinely complete, when the interior and the exterior are the same thing, and both of them are real, the external results that you were previously trying to produce through technique arrive without effort and stay without maintenance. Gravity works, and a man with that much mass cannot be ignored.